Usually with my videos, I like to talk about the history of the topic I'm referring to. In this one though, I won't be doing this, except for two small things. The Freedom 100 began in 2003 when officials of what was then called the Indy Pro Series explored whether a support race around the oval was possible in a period of the month where the action on track was quiet, along with giving the future stars more media exposure. And the second thing, the event was cancelled in 2020, mainly as a result of the pandemic, but hasn't featured ever since then, and more than likely never will, as the owner of the Indy NXT series, Roger Penske, was apparently not a fan of drivers with little experience racing around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Those are all the historical details out of the way. There is more that I could potentially mention, but honestly, that's not what this video is about. Instead, I want to make a case for this race to return. I know it will make absolutely no difference whatsoever, as the race is destined to never return again. However, I think this is something that I'll find quite cathartic and might be something that others feel the same about. As to me, this was more than just a feeder series race, even though that's basically what this was. Before I ramble on about how awesome this race was, I can understand a couple of reasons why Penske may have had his concerns about keeping the race going. There is one obvious starting point, and that is the crashes. If you had one, it was rarely a small one, and even rarer if you somehow managed to get out of having one despite being perpendicular to the inside wall. Seriously, someone explain to me the physics of how this was a thing. However, like I say, the race included a fair number of terrible looking accidents. All the drivers did get out of these crashes alive, but still it's perhaps not the optic that you want to portray to the general public, particularly to casual fans who may have been watching the race for the first time, and maybe thought that these up-and-coming stars aren't quite the real deal. Also another issue, particularly in later years, was the car counts. Although this was basically the same for every Indy Lights round, roughly 8 to 10 cars would be making up the field. I know there's the adage of it only takes 2 cars to make a motor race, for which I'll talk about in more detail later on, but again, this isn't perhaps the sight that you want being displayed to a global audience. It depicts a weak series, with very little interest from sponsors, teams and drivers. Again, this was as impactful on the rest of the Indy Lights season as it was on the Freedom 100, but to the owners of the series, or indeed any other series in a similar position, this doesn't make for pleasant viewing. However, it's about time I make a case for the return of something that won't return. In the immediate future anyway. The Freedom 100 was more than just another feeder series race. Name me another race, full stop, that has had several close finishes where the winning margin was less than half a tenth of a second. Name me a feeder series race where you'd see so much jostling for position. Also, name me a feeder series race where up-and-coming drivers get so much attention. The 2013 four-wide finish for the win is arguably one of the most iconic motorsport moments ever, with perhaps one of the most iconic still frames in racing history too. You'd be forgiven for thinking it was forced or scripted, etc. However, when you see the build-up to it, with the drivers going 3 wide in turns 3 and 4 at around 190 to 200 miles an hour, that is about as raw and natural as it gets. Terrifying all the same, however, the fact that the drivers kept it clean throughout such a treacherous scenario just goes to show what talented racers these lot are. You'd also be forgiven if it was just a flash in the pan. However, close finishes in 2014, 16, 18 and 19 meant that this race was becoming renowned for its nail-biting conclusions. It became a race that people were starting to mark as a must-watch. Then there's the drivers. They gave a brilliant account of themselves. They were not afraid to try and go for bold and daring passes to try and inherit the lead. The best thing about it though, was that the racing between them was on the most part exceptionally clean. When there have been crashes, it's usually been as a result of a loose race car, which no driver, no matter how talented they are, is going to save. In close combat where the gaps between the cars is usually no more than the size of your average gerbil, the drivers kept it clean. Which is perhaps even more impressive given what I imagine must be an adrenaline rush of immense proportions surging around their system. But that demonstrates another point in that these drivers who competed in this race were extremely competent behind the wheel. I mean, I hate to refer back to this example. Actually, I don't, because this is just awesome. But when you see this, and then think that they got through there like that as well, I don't see what further the drivers have to do to demonstrate that they can be allowed to do this race competently. Crashes are also going to be a part of racing. Even with some of the best drivers in the world competing in the race, the Indy 500 still has some monster crashes, and I don't think that race is going away anytime soon. Well, at least not I'm aware of anyway. The Freedom 100 was also the biggest shining light for these development drivers. The race was easily the biggest of the championship, and was by far the one that garnered the most attention, including globally. It's the race that people remember the likes of Peter Dempsey, Wade Cunningham, and Dean Stoneman. Without this race, with the greatest of respect, most people would have completely forgotten about them. They'd be racing nobodies, which their talents weren't warranting of such an association. Current IndyCar driver and one of American open wheel racing's greatest feeder series drivers, and certainly a future IndyCar superstar, Carl Kirkwood, missed out on the chance of competing in the Freedom 100 before it was canned, and said, "Dropping the Freedom 100, which is by far the biggest and most competitive race of the year for Indy Lights, just doesn't make sense." Now, like I said earlier, some will point to the low car count. My argument to that is simple. If you have a product that is able to produce a great race, then particularly at the Freedom 100, car counts don't matter. Obviously the more the better, but in an 8-car field the 2018 race was just wonderful. Nowadays the Indy NXT series has around 18 to 19 cars, and is probably in its most stable position yet, so in theory the race would be in its healthiest state since the late noughties. Alas not. It's incredibly frustrating. I've done a video on a preview to the Indy NXT series, and whilst I'm still happy that the video got nearly 5,000 views, it's one of the lowest viewed mini documentary style videos on my channel. It perhaps points to one of two things, or both of these things. The first being that the series doesn't have a whole lot of notoriety at the moment, despite it being in a better position car count wise, alongside the inclusion of 3-time W Series champion Jamie Chadwick racing this season. Or that the lack of the Freedom 100 has meant that there are less eyeballs on this series. It was what was in essence giving the series, and perhaps more importantly its future IndyCar stars, local and global notoriety. Winning the Freedom 100 didn't mean you were instantly propelled to IndyCar, but it certainly gave you a fighting chance of doing so. Demonstrating what ability these drivers had behind the wheel, and allowing them to get a vague feeling of what the Indy 500 drivers were going through, was crucial, I feel, in their development. This was more than just a loss for drivers wanting to make a name for themselves. It's a huge shame for the fans. Their cheers throughout the race, particularly towards the latter stages, gave a great atmosphere, as well as justify how excited they were to witness the organised mayhem that was mere feet away from them. A crowd engaging in a phenomenal spectacle, either laughing, tensing up, taking several short but sharp intakes of breath, or screaming so loud that they drowned out the dozen flat-out engines on the track, and burst the eardrums of the people in close proximity to them. The racing product allowed them to be that way though, and I can assure you that there's no chance that on the rest of the calendar the crowd would be doing the same thing. I'm not sure you see them get quite as enthused about a road course race at the same track for 35 laps. The reality is, we'll never get the Freedom 100 back for the immediate future. The feeder series race that drew the eyes of the world. The race that made development drivers legends. That though is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching. Would you want to see this race return? What was your favourite Freedom 100 and why was it 2013? Okay, joking aside, there were several fantastic Freedom 100s, and I'd be interested in reading what they are in the comment section down below. However, until the next video, be kind to each other and enjoy the rest of your day.